Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about implementations with unknowns. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, when you figure out that there might be a few challenges with a solution, do you try to figure out everything before you start, or do you cross one bridge at a time and proceed with the implementation? I do both, depending on the situation. But usually it is that I try to cross a bridge and then I try to figure out what further down the line what the unknowns. The reason being very simply that it's because usually it's impossible for you to know how to fix things that you don't know how to fix, if that makes sense. But that's sort of the beautiful part about well, at least trying to stay a little bit humble. What is it that they say? A wise person or someone who is wise knows the limitations, knows the extent of their own ignorance, if that makes sense. And I like to think in those terms very often because although I might not know how to solve a specific problem, I know the boundaries, if that makes sense, of the problem usually. In other words, I know if that problem is so difficult and so untangible to solve, if I don't figure it out, is this a dead-end project? Like, can I actually progress whatsoever? Is it likely that I'm going to be able to solve this thing without solving that problem first? Because if I figure out that this is a core piece of the issue where like, I have no way of shipping or like progressing without figuring this out first, then I have to figure out, quote unquote, figure out everything firsthand. An example would be I had what I call an impossible request once upon a time by a friend, and the friend basically asked if I could create an application that where she could input her thoughts, and the computer or like her phone would in that case convert that into good ideas. And I tried to explain to her that I could create something that could simulate that sort of behavior, but I would need, because it would basically become a machine learning algorithm that it would be a very complicated thing to do, and it would probably not work as well as she would have liked it to do, because I'm unfortunately not able to create virtually a sentient being. At least not now. I'm not that good. So in that scenario, I knew that had I been tried to make that app, there would be no point in making anything else, because this is such a fundamental piece of the problem that I'm trying to solve, that without that solved, there is no reason whatsoever to continue. But luckily, usually the unknowns are smaller pieces of a larger whole. So if I know, for example, that I'm going to build something where I have a few things I'm not 100% sure on how to do. For example, I don't know where a specific API is, or I don't know how to authenticate towards that system or so forth, or I don't know who to talk to in order to get some business requirement on something that the system is going to do. That's not a problem, because I know for a fact that I can solve that at a later stage, so it doesn't block me, because I can work on the stuff that is meaningful, or the things that I actually know, and the core of the problem, if that makes sense. It's similar to how I've said to you a few times before, where I talk about core skills, or knowing the core of something. An example would be if you know how to build a web shop for, say, selling cars or something like that, then you may not know how to exactly build the same sort of system for someone who's selling pizzas or clocks or something like that, but you know how to build a platform. Like, you have enough knowledge now to set up a server, set up a UI, set up the different domain entities that are basically common for everything. So there are nuances and things you may not know, unknowns for this new domain that you're dealing with, but the core problem you still know. You know how to build a web shop type of thing, right? And that same mindset applies, I argue, to most situations as a software developer. And this is the way I try to think about problems. I try to do the things that I know for a fact how to do, so that I can build on top when it's time to add the stuff that I'm not so sure about how to do. So an example would be, if I did have an API, I don't know exactly where it is or how it's going to look or something like that. Well, that's not a problem, because I can build the entire system, and then I can create a endpoint, an interface that represents the call to that API, because I know it's somewhere. I don't know where it is, but I know that somewhere it's there, and it's going to give me some information, and I can mock and stub that off now. So I can fetch it, I can implement that functionality when it's time, but that doesn't block me from from doing everything else. Same thing as if I have some magical business logic that's going to do something, I don't know exactly how, doesn't matter either, because I can stop that off and get a hold of the person who knows how to do it. I can put it in a class or something like that and just fake it for now, and then when I know how to do it, I will implement it, and that makes it possible for me to build everything else. This is one of the tips that I try to give to people who have a back-end and front-end part of a team, where the back-end developers and the front-end developers, usually the way that it goes is that the front-end developers are usually blocked by the back-end developers until there is a data model. And so I always try to tell teams is, you don't actually have to have the back-end done before you start on the front-end if you can just agree upon like a basic starting interface, if that makes sense. And so this is why I always tell the front-end developers, don't just take the raw data that you're getting from the back-end. Create your own interface on your side, and then, because what happens when you do that is that you can stub that data in the front end, build the entire experience, and then if it doesn't fit completely, that's not the end of the world. You can even map things into a data, like a basically fake serialization and so forth, because if you have that interface, when the backend's done, it's all about fitting that backend request into that shape. And now you don't really have to worry so much about, you don't have to wait. That's why you can always, in my opinion, as an efficiently working full stack team, you should almost always be able to start on the back end and the front end at the same time without being blocked, because of this principle, as I said, because you know that there is some data, you know how to build the UX, user interfaces, all of that stuff. The only thing you don't know exactly is the exact shape of the data model that's going to come from the backend, but you don't have to, because you can stub it off and defer figuring that out until later without blocking all the other work. So what I want you to take away from this is that usually I try to segment things up and try to take the problem when I come to that bridge, or like cross it when I come to that bridge. Cross one bridge at a time, whatever you call it. And it usually works really well, but it also requires you to sort of understand, as I like to say, the core problems, because sometimes you have an issue, like an unknown problem, that is so significant that you can't really ship anything meaningful without figuring that out first. It's not, it's not worth actually doing the work, such as, as I said, so let's say that you're a backend developer and you need to create a web interface and you don't know how to do that, then it's pointless even starting until you know how to do that, because you're not going to be able to ship anything until you can create a UI. Same thing for a front-end developer. If you have like a backend or like a server or something like that and you don't know how to do any of that and you have nobody else to help you, you need to figure that out. Pointless to progress otherwise. Same thing with my story. If I don't know how to create a basically sentient being who helps with the idea generating app that my friend asked for, doesn't matter that I know iOS or Kotlin or Java or so forth, because I can build an app that will do absolutely nothing without that piece of functionality. But usually you're not in that situation. Usually you have known things that you know how to do and things that are unknown, and they're usually smaller pieces of the whole, and that is a very good position to be in, because if you know how to architect your code well, those small unknowns are not really, you don't have to deal with them until later on. You can build most of the system and then look at those, as long as you know how to make sure that because sometimes you have these smaller problems that they're going to get you if you don't know how to structure things within the system, because sometimes those unknowns are actually very important to at least understand at a fundamental level, so that you don't put yourself in a bad position and when it's time to actually fix those problems, you have to actually go back and undo a bunch of work, because you didn't fully understand how to segment things in such a way that you could not, as I said with my interface, if you didn't do something like that, like an interface or so forth, it might have been much more complicated for you. It's hard to say, but in general, it's a very good principle to follow, and you will get better at identifying how to isolate the unknowns into very benign structures with experience. Have a great day.